Hello everyone, welcome back to Crafts by the Bow. Today I'm using some of the new products from our May to August catalogue, and this is instead of an annual catalogue. Now we're going to get, I think it's 3 times a year, sort of a slightly smaller catalogue, but we're going to have lots of online exclusives which won't be in here. So always check catalogue and on the online exclusives as well. But today I want to use a couple of things. I'm going to use the Waterside Retreat. I'm going to use the stamps, the dies. I might use the trinkets, I'm not sure yet. I'm definitely using the paper. And then I'm also going to use, I'm not going to use this, but I did think that this would go really well with the project I'm making. So if you want to recreate my project, you might want to use some of these dies. I haven't got those ones yet, but they are on my list. But I'm also using another new product, which is this little rectangular cornered punch. And I think the next page has the picture of the stamps. Yeah, here. The exciting time stamps, which fit into this rectangle made by the punch. And it's a card that I've made before with a different kind of punch. You might have made it as well. It's one of those where you punch a hole in the front of your card and then you cut designer series paper to fit round it using that same punch. And so to start, I've got just half a sheet of thick basic white, and this measures 4 1/4 by 11, and I've scored it at 5 1/2, but I'm not actually going to fold it yet. I find it easier to fold a little bit later on. So what we need is our rectangle punch, and so I've just had another card piece there, it was just falling over. And we're going to punch this rectangle shape on what will become the front of our card. And I'm just going to pop it in here. Doesn't matter, you know, whereabouts. But what I am going to do is, I don't know if you can see, but there's a line on this punch. Just underneath where it says there's Stampin' Up, there's a rectangle all the way around. I'm going to use the top of that rectangle to line up or eyeball my card, just to make sure that I've got it level. Okay, and then I'm just going to look, just check. Yeah, that looks level. Okay, save that for a label on another card. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use the designer series paper. I have already made a couple of projects from it, and I've got tiny little scraps left. So I've pre-prepared a few, but on this designer series paper, there is a sheet that has lots of like little cutter parts. I don't quite remember how it goes now, but it's got these little cutter parts on, and I've cut out the ones that I want. And some of the pieces are quite small that are left. And so what I've decided is that's what I'm going to use for my punched pieces. So something like this and this. This was like a little shell. I don't know if I've got another one. No, this was like a little shell that I've already cut out. And you can use the backing as well. And this was a little scene with some boats, like this one, little yachts on it. So I've cut that out. And altogether, you need probably 10 or 11 little rectangles, some with an image, some with just a backing that's less busy. And like this one, all I did was I chose where I wanted to cut. So if I pop that in here, I think I'd like to have a few of the trees and the little yacht. So I'm just going to cut that there. And it leaves me enough room at the bottom that I can cut another one of the images. Let's see, I might have these little canoes and the bottom of the trees. And that's all you need to do. And if I decide I don't want that piece, I can turn it over and use the back ends. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my images on and some of the images I'm not using, but I'm going to place my images so I can see and choose what I want. And then the different backings I'm using are the piece from all the life jackets and the back of some of these fish, the backs of the cut apart pieces that are this misty moonlight stripe. So just a selection. I've just got a few on my table and I'm going to use whatever I think would work. Now that hasn't cut out really well. I can't have held it beautifully straight. So I'm just going to go over that with my bone folder and flatten it. Now before we start to stick things on, now is when I'm going to fold my card over. I just find it easier to do that punch when it's flat and not when I've got like this edge fold to try and contend with as well. And what I want to do is I want to stamp in here. I want to stamp my sentiment here. So with a pencil, I'm just going to mark where the edges of that rounded rectangle are. And let me just find my stamps. I'm going to use this stamp and the happy birthday. And I've just chosen two colours that happen to be in the paper. I've chosen a misty moonlight and then I'm going to use Secret Sea for my sentiment. I'm going to close that. I'm just going to squash it down as much as I can. And I've got the border piece and that fits really nicely just inside that punched out image. But I find it hard to hold a piece down and try and stamp, and I end up getting a little smudge on the edges or something. So that's why I drew the little corners, because I'm going to use that to line up and do my stamping. If you have a steadier hand than me and you can hold the card flat and stamp at the same time, then, you know, that's great. It's probably easier. I'm just going to move this right down there so I can see. And I know that I need to stamp slightly inside those markers. Okay. And I don't need this colour anymore at the moment. I do need the Secret Sea. And that's what I'm going to stamp my sentiment with. You can close this, stamp right in the middle again. But I just find it easier for me just to stamp like this. And while we've got this colour ink out on a little scrap of paper that I know I've got out, oh, here it is, I'm going to stamp the larger grass from the Relaxing Waterside. And I'm going to use the Secret Sea because that's one of my colours. I've only got a scrap. Stamp that. And then I'm going to use the die cut. Oh, I might stamp one on the inside as well. Let's do that while we're here. And stamp here on the inside. And I've left a little gap at the bottom because I am going to put some Designer Series paper there. And then with the matching die, here it is. I'm going to cut this out on the scrap piece. So I'm just going to pop that through the Stampin' Cut machine and that will just give us that one little piece of grass and I'll use that for the front. Now that our ink's dry, I'm just going to erase those marks. And then when it closes, that's what you can see. So you've got that, that little sentiment popping right out at you. Let's fold that down again. I find with the thicker basic white, it takes a little while for the fibres to remember that they're going to stay closed. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to choose pieces of the Designer Series paper. I'm going to put it on my mat though. It does get a little bit sticky. And I'm just going to offset them. I'm going to make a line of paper here, and then my next row I will have it slightly offset like this. And it doesn't really take too long at all to glue this all together. Just have to remember that how much glue you need. I don't need my glue to go the full length of this, so I'm just going to do about 3/4. If you're a bit unsure as to whether it's going to stick on the edge, we know that this is going to run over the edge, so you could just put a little line of glue there. And then we simply just leave a nice little gap through it, and then we go on to the next piece. I'm going to have an image up here next, I think. The whole of this will fit on, so I can put glue on the whole of it. And then see how I'm just like sort of looking at bricks, each going to overlap like this. And I don't want to have two images together. So I'm going to have an image and then more of a back-in piece. You just have to make sure that they're nice and straight and that you've got that same border all the way through. Okay, now some of the pieces you won't need a full scrap for. So I've got some pieces that, as I was cutting out just odds and ends, I know that it's not a full piece, so if I need a half piece for up here, that would be perfect. I don't need to cut into a full one. Okay, now let's have a look at the bottom. I'm going to do this shell piece, but I know that it's going to be too big. And what I might do when I cut that, I might use that at the top. So I don't put all the pieces on straight away. I like to have some that are sort of overhanging. I can trim them and then use them for the front as well. But I am going to just put a few on. Let's find some a little bit smaller. I think I'm going to do just a small edge over here. Don't need too much glue. But if you have it on your silicone mat, at least it's going to stick onto there if there's excess glue. Okay, like that. And then let me just see. Let me find my one that had a little boat scene. I think I'm going to put that over here. And depending on where you actually punched your shape will depend on how much of an overlap you have. Oh, let me just measure that. Okay, so I need about 3/4 of it with glue on. This is a design that's been around such a long time. I think I've used it with most of my punches. I don't tend to use it with dies because you have to die cut a lot of pieces, and I'm not always so interested in doing that. Quick punch of something, it's nice and fast. All right, let's have a look. I know I need just a tiny bit here, but I'm going to pop these ones on first. I'm just going to eyeball down here. Make sure I've got that nice border again. And here I've got just a small piece. Let's see. Oh, that would just be big enough, like a millimetre too big. So if you have lots of little pieces of designer series paper left over, this is a great layout to use. I'm going to need something here that's tiny, and I have got this. I wonder if I could just, I bet I could just put that on. Rather than gluing on the designer series paper for this one, I'm just going to go over that little square, and I'll end up with just a couple of little trees. So it can be a little bit fiddly just waiting for things to dry, but no, it's really quite therapeutic looking at the patterns and finding ones which you think will work. Right, now before I stick any more on at the top, I know that I want the bottom of this shell. So I'm just going to take this off, turn it over, and I'm going to use my bigger scissors just to trim. Now, some of these might be a little bit gluey still. So what I like to do is just stick them onto my silicone mat. And that way I don't end up with glue on my fingers or all over. There's that tiny little piece we had to cut off. There we go. And it doesn't have to be designer series paper. If you've got little scraps of like an embossed piece of cardstock, you can put that on as well. I do have a little bit of glue on the back, so once that's dry, I'll just use my glue eraser and take that off. Okay, so now we can look at the top. Where's that other piece that I wanted? The bottom of the shell. There it is. So I'm going to have this. I might put it here in the middle, like that. And let me see, what can I put over here? Let's put another one of this. I'll do those two. And then maybe another one of these little pictures. Let's try. You don't get much of it, but you get enough. Okay, I'm going to start with the middle piece. Oops. And I'm sure you don't want to watch lots of me gluing, so feel free just to fast forward and end up at the next section. I will catch up with you in a moment. I'm going to need another little piece for here. Let's use this. Yeah. If you wanted to make this fishing themed, there's quite a few little pieces, like the ones with these fish on, and then there's some, I'll just get the other one because this is what I nearly used, with the little lures on. This piece, let's turn it around. I very nearly did the fish and the lures on the floats, so that would work nicely as well. Ooh. And then keep these other little pieces because you'll find that you can make another card with only having to punch out a couple of extra shapes. I'm just checking that I've got everywhere there. Yeah. So let's trim this off. This little piece here. And then, oh, just that one little piece at the top corner there. And just get my glue eraser, erase some of this. It's just from my silicone mat because it already had some glue on. There we go. Okay, just going to put the lid on my glue for a moment. Okay. Now let's see where that die cut is. So here's my little die cut. And I was going to put it just on the front here, just on dimensionals, to give it a little extra focus and a little height. But there are also some matching loose anchor trinkets. And if you wanted to put, oh, they're quite heavy. If you wanted to put one of those on, that would look really good. Or remember I showed you that other set that I said this might work? Let me go back to that. I think something maybe like the die cut of the yacht or the birds might look nice on there as well. Now, I'm probably going to mail this, so I'm not going to put the trinket on. I think I'm just going to put this on. You could put a little bow on here or a little knot, and you could use something like the Baker's Twine Essentials pack, or this is the twine that I was using last week from the 12 Days of Crafting Advent Calendar. You could certainly tie that around there and do a little knot. So let's just cut a bit of that. Just going to wind it round a couple of times. I don't particularly need a bow or anything, but a little reef knot would work. Okay, and then we'll get a dimensional. I'm going to pop one dimensional over the twine. Let's take the backing off here. Just see where that goes to. Just want to make sure that that's not showing through. Nope, that's okay. I'm going to put it a little bit higher though. There we are, and we'll trim these little tails off. And then I said that I would do a little piece of designer series paper on the inside. I'm going to cut this down to about, let's see, maybe 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch. Let's see where I've put my trimmer. Let's have a look. Let's do 1/2 inch. I can always cut it down to 1/4 if it looks too wide. See what it would look at 1/4 actually. You know, I think I'm just going to put that little 1/4 piece on. So even little scraps will make a very pretty card. You could always save some of these scraps as well to do like a herringbone design. I like to do that with kind of 1/2 inch pieces and little scraps of plain card or embossed card. But here we go. So that's using the new, let me see exactly what it's called, rounded rectangle punch. And I think that's a nice little way to show off small pieces of designer series paper where you have just small images on them and then some of the background paper as well. I would probably not put any adhesive gems or anything on because I know this is going to go in the mail, but you could certainly add some of the plain gems. So I hope you like that. Hope you give it a go and show me what you make and which designer series papers you're using. Thanks for joining me again this week. I'll see you later. Take care and happy crafting.